"You're laughing now," Daniel Mercer said quietly as the handcuffs closed around his wrists. "But before this day is over, you may wish you had listened." The marble lobby of Whitmore Global went silent. Nearly 70 employees had stopped beneath the towering glass atrium to watch two Columbus police officers stand beside a man most of them knew only as the contractor who fixed security terminals and carried his lunch in a brown paper bag. Across from him stood Alexandra Whitmore, 39, immaculate in a Navy executive suit, her expression sharpened by the confidence of someone who had spent 15 years turning her family company into a multi-billion-dollar empire. Then she laughed. It was brief, cold, almost casual. "Mr. Mercer, people like you always believe there's another explanation when they finally get caught." Daniel did not answer immediately. He looked at the polished floor, the employees gathering near the elevators, and finally the enormous silver letters spelling Whitmore Global behind Alexandra. "People like me?" he asked. "Contractors who mistake temporary access for authority. That isn't what happened. The police can decide that." One officer spoke calmly. "Mr. Mercer, we need you to come with us while we review the complaint regarding unauthorized access and removal of corporate records." Daniel nodded. "I'll cooperate." Alexandra folded her arms. "Good choice." A few nervous whispers moved through the lobby. Someone mentioned stolen financial files. Someone else said Daniel had tried to blackmail the CEO. None of them knew that 48 hours earlier, Daniel had been practically invisible here. He was 42, widowed, raising his 10-year-old daughter Sophie alone in a modest apartment outside Columbus. He drove a 12-year-old Ford, repaired electronics instead of replacing them, and accepted contract jobs that allowed him to be home most evenings. Nothing about him suggested that Whitmore Global should fear him. That was precisely why Alexandra found the situation almost insulting. "You came into my company," she said, "accessed information you had no right to see, and expected me to believe you were protecting my employees." Daniel met her eyes. "I was." Alexandra smiled again. "And now you're in handcuffs." Those two facts can exist at the same time. The smile disappeared. Daniel's calmness bothered her more than anger would have. He was not begging. He was not bargaining. He seemed almost as though he were waiting for something. Chief Operating Officer Grant Holloway stood several feet behind Alexandra, holding a leather portfolio against his chest. "Officers," Grant said, "the company has provided the relevant access logs. There's really nothing more to discuss here." Daniel turned toward him. Grant's eyes held his for half a second before looking away. That tiny movement confirmed something Daniel had suspected since dawn. "Mr. Mercer," the officer said, "we should go." Daniel took one step toward the revolving doors, then stopped. "Officer, when procedure allows, I want to make a phone call." Alexandra gave a soft laugh. "Call a lawyer. Call your friends. Call whoever you think can rescue you." Daniel looked back at her. There was no embarrassment in his face now, only quiet certainty. "I'm not calling anyone to rescue me." Grant's fingers tightened around the portfolio. Alexandra noticed it but said nothing. "Then what exactly is this mysterious call supposed to accomplish?" she asked. Daniel glanced once at Grant before answering. "It makes sure the originals reach the people who need to see them." Grant went completely still. For the first time that morning, Alexandra looked away from Daniel and studied the man standing beside her. Daniel saw the question forming in her eyes, but the officers were already guiding him toward the exit. As the revolving doors opened onto the cool Ohio morning, Daniel spoke one final sentence without turning around. "You should ask Grant why he's afraid of one phone call." 48 hours earlier, Daniel Mercer's biggest concern had nothing to do with police officers, missing money, or Alexandra Whitmore. It was a science project spread across his kitchen table. "Dad, the bridge keeps leaning." Sophie Mercer frowned at the wooden craft sticks she had glued together for school. Daniel set down his coffee and examined the crooked structure with exaggerated seriousness. "I see the problem. Too much glue. Not enough respect for load distribution." Sophie stared at him. "I'm ten kropka." Daniel smiled. "Too much glue." Morning light filtered through the blinds of their modest apartment outside Columbus. A framed photograph of Daniel's late wife, Emily, stood beside the refrigerator, close enough to remain part of their mornings without turning every morning into a memorial. 3 years had passed since Daniel became the only parent at the table. He had learned to braid hair badly, pack lunches efficiently, stretch a paycheck carefully, and answer difficult questions without pretending he knew everything. "You're working at the skyscraper today?" Sophie asked. "Whitmore Global. Is that the company with the woman on all those business magazines?" "Alexandra Whitmore." Sophie pushed another craft stick into place. She looked serious. Running a company that size probably requires some serious days. Mom said serious people still have to be kind. Daniel looked briefly toward Emily's photograph. "Your mom said a lot of inconveniently wise things." At 7:18 a.m., Daniel dropped Sophie at school, waited until she disappeared through the entrance, then drove his 12-year-old Ford downtown. Whitmore Global headquarters rose 40 stories above the street, all blue glass, brushed steel, and quiet money. Daniel entered through the service entrance, carrying a toolbox and a brown paper lunch bag. His temporary badge identified him as a systems maintenance contractor. Most employees never looked twice. He preferred it that way. For the past 3 years, Daniel had deliberately built a smaller life. His vendor resume mentioned network hardware, access control systems, electrical diagnostics, and security infrastructure. It did not mention the 11 years before Emily became ill. It did not mention forensic compliance. It did not mention financial systems investigations or the corporations whose hidden transactions he had once reconstructed from fragments everyone else overlooked. That life had required airports, midnight calls, 70-hour weeks, and too many promises to his family that began with soon. After losing Emily, Daniel stopped saying soon. Sophie got his evenings now. At 4:36 p.m., a service request sent him to the 32nd floor, where an executive access terminal had begun rejecting authorized badges. Daniel removed the faceplate, connected his diagnostic laptop, and ran the standard test. Green lines moved across the screen. Authentication tables, network timestamps, encryption checks. Then something flashed between two ordinary system processes. Daniel's hand stopped. It was not supposed to be there. A financial authorization token had somehow passed through an access control server. He reopened the temporary diagnostic cache. The token appeared again, attached to a transfer from an employee retirement account into an entity called Northstar Administrative Holdings. Amount, $24.8 million. Daniel stared at the authorization field. Executive approval, A. Whitmore. He checked the company directory. Northstar was not listed among Whitmore Global's retirement administrators. Footsteps approached behind him. "Everything working?" Daniel turned. Grant Holloway stood 10 feet away, perfectly dressed, pleasantly smiling. "Almost," Daniel said. Grant's eyes dropped toward the laptop, then fixed the terminal and leave the rest alone. Daniel said nothing. Grant walked toward the elevator. Only after the doors closed did Daniel examine the transaction again. Beneath Alexandra's authorization was a second credential identifying the person who had initiated the transfer. Daniel read the name twice. Grant Holloway. Then he noticed something even stranger. The transfer had been scheduled to erase its own audit trail at midnight. Daniel checked the clock in the corner of his laptop. 4:41 p.m., 7 hours and 19 minutes remained before the audit trail disappeared. He did not touch the transfer, download the financial record, or attempt to enter any restricted directory. Experience had taught him that evidence became vulnerable the moment an investigator grew impatient. Instead, he preserved only what his authorized diagnostic session had already generated: timestamp, routing path, authorization token, transaction identifier, and the automated deletion command attached to the system process. Facts first, conclusions later. Daniel disconnected the terminal and carried his toolbox into an empty service room. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead while the building's ventilation system breathed through the ceiling vents. He unfolded the maintenance ticket and wrote 3 things on the back: $24.8 million, Northstar Administrative Holdings, Grant Holloway. Then he added Alexandra Whitmore's authorization code beneath them. One transfer could be an accounting procedure he did not understand. A scheduled deletion could be a legitimate security protocol. Both together deserve another look. Daniel reopened the diagnostic cache and searched backward through temporary routing fragments generated by the malfunctioning terminal. A second transaction appeared. $31.6 million. Same destination structure. Different shell entity. Same executive approval. Same initiating credential. Grant Holloway. Daniel's expression tightened. He went back another month. $18.3 million. Then $27.9 million. The pattern was too clean. Each transfer originated from employee retirement reserves, moved through an administrative company with no obvious connection to Whitmore Global, and carried authorization that appeared to come from Alexandra. Each audit trail was scheduled for automated removal after processing. Daniel checked the combined amount. More than $102 million. His phone vibrated. Sophie. Hey, kiddo. The bridge stands now. That's good news. Mrs. Bennett says we need to explain why. Daniel looked at the numbers on his screen. Because a strong structure depends on where the weight goes. Sophie groaned. You're doing the dad lesson thing again. Occupational hazard. Are you coming home for dinner? Daniel glanced at the clock. Yes. I just need to finish something. Promise. He paused. Years earlier, he had made too many promises while staring at screens exactly like this one. I promise. After hanging up, Daniel walked to the employee benefits office and found retirement coordinator Melissa Grant preparing to leave. Quick question, he said. Does Whitmore use Northstar Administrative Holdings for pension management? Melissa frowned. Never heard of them. What about Summit Ridge Benefits Group? No. Her expression sharpened. What? Something appeared during a systems repair. Our retirement funds are administered through Harrison Mutual and 2 approved custodians. Anything else would require compliance review. Daniel thanked her and returned upstairs. At 5:23, he checked the metadata one final time. That was when he saw what he had missed. Alexandra's approval credential was authentic, but it was not being applied separately to each transfer. The system was reusing a single master authorization issued 8 months earlier. Someone had taken one legitimate executive approval and turned it into a permanent doorway. Daniel followed the authorization chain to its originating document. He could not open the restricted file, but its title was visible in the routing metadata. Employee Benefits Administrative Restructuring. Beneath, it was another reference, marked Compliance Exception. Daniel copied only the reference number onto his work order. Then a new system notification appeared. Someone elsewhere in the building had just accessed the same diagnostic session Daniel was viewing. Seconds later, the oldest transaction vanished from the cache. Then the second disappeared. Someone knew Daniel had found the trail and was erasing it while he watched. Before the final record disappeared, Daniel read one last line embedded in the authorization history. The compliance exception had been acknowledged 8 months earlier by Alexandra Whitmore herself. At 5:31 p.m., Daniel stood alone in the service room and watched the final transaction disappear from the diagnostic cache. Someone was cleaning the trail in real time. He closed his laptop immediately. If Grant Holloway knew what Daniel had found, continuing to search would only give him more opportunities to erase evidence and accuse Daniel of exceeding his access. Daniel needed something more valuable than another transaction. He needed Alexandra Whitmore to make a choice. 10 minutes later, he stood outside the executive suite on the 40th floor. Alexandra's assistant looked at his contractor badge and shook her head. Ms. Whitmore doesn't accept unscheduled meetings. Tell her it concerns an employee retirement account and a compliance exception carrying her authorization. The assistant stopped typing. Your name? Daniel Mercer. 3 minutes later, Daniel entered Alexandra's office. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed downtown Columbus beneath the fading afternoon light. Alexandra remained behind a wide walnut desk, reviewing documents on a tablet. You have 5 minutes. Daniel placed his folded maintenance ticket on the desk, but kept one hand over the written reference numbers. I found financial authorization data passing through an access control terminal I was assigned to repair. Alexandra looked up. Financial data? More than $100 million in transfers from employee retirement reserves. Her expression hardened. You're a systems contractor. Yes. Then why were you examining financial records? I wasn't. The authorization tokens appeared inside the diagnostic routing cache. Daniel explained the transfers, the shell companies, the scheduled deletions, and the master authorization being reused across multiple transactions. Alexandra listened until he mentioned Grant. Stop. Daniel became silent. You're accusing my chief operating officer of stealing from this company? I'm asking you to verify what your systems recorded. Grant has worked beside me for 12 years. Then verification should protect him. Alexandra leaned back. And my authorization? It appears legitimate. So you're accusing me too? No, you just said my credentials approve these transfers. I said one master approval is being reused. Those aren't the same statement. For the first time, Alexandra studied him rather than his contractor badge. You seem unusually comfortable discussing compliance architecture. I've had experience. Doing what? Daniel paused. Work that taught me not to confuse a signature with intent. Alexandra's eyes narrowed. What do you want, Mr. Mercer? Nothing. Everyone wants something. Then check the records yourself. He slid the maintenance ticket forward. These reference numbers are enough for independent compliance to locate. The original authorization chain. Alexandra did not touch it. You copied company information. I documented identifiers generated during authorized maintenance. That distinction sounds convenient. It's legally important. Alexandra's voice cooled. Is that supposed to impress me? No. It's supposed to protect your employees. Silence filled the office. Daniel pointed toward the reference marked compliance exception. Someone warned this company 8 months ago. Your account acknowledged that warning. If you never saw it, you need to know why. If you did see it, you need to read it again. Alexandra stood. Be very careful. I'm being careful. That's why I came to you first. First, you have until tomorrow morning to preserve the records and initiate an independent review. Alexandra stared at him. And if I refuse, then I make sure the evidence survives whoever is deleting it. She pressed the intercom. Security. Daniel picked up the maintenance ticket. You're choosing trust over verification. I'm choosing not to be threatened in my own office. Daniel walked toward the door. It opened before he reached it. Grant Holloway stood outside with 2 security employees behind him. His pleasant smile returned. Problem. Alexandra answered before Daniel could. Mr. Mercer believes you've been moving retirement money through unauthorized companies. Grant looked surprised for exactly the right amount of time. Then he laughed softly. Daniel, that's quite an accusation. Daniel watched his eyes. I never called it an accusation. Grant's smile weakened. Daniel walked past him. At 6:12 p.m., while driving home to Sophie, Daniel received an automated email from Whitmore Global. His contractor access had been suspended pending a security investigation. 30 seconds later, another notification arrived from his secure preservation service. Someone had attempted to alter the maintenance logs connected to his badge. Daniel pulled into a gas station, opened his phone, and activated an old encrypted archive he had not used since leaving forensic compliance. He entered the reference numbers, his written timeline, and one designated release contact, Rachel Bennett. Then he created a single instruction. If he called and said release the originals, every preserved record would immediately leave his control. Daniel slept less than 4 hours that night, but Sophie never knew it. At 6:20 the next morning, he stood at the stove making scrambled eggs while she searched the apartment for a missing sneaker. Check under the couch, he called. Already did. Behind your backpack. Dad, shoes don't hide behind backpacks. That sounds exactly like something a shoe would want you to believe. Sophie appeared carrying the missing sneaker and gave him a suspicious look. Daniel smiled, but his phone felt unusually heavy in his pocket. The secure archive was active. Rachel Bennett's name sat behind a release protocol Daniel had hoped never to use again. At 7:35, after dropping Sophie at school, he found 3 missed calls from Whitmore Global Security and an email ordering him to return company property immediately. His toolbox and personal diagnostic equipment were still inside headquarters. Daniel could have mailed the badge and walked away. Instead, he drove downtown. If someone was altering records under his credentials, disappearing would make their story easier. At 8:09, His badge flashed red at the service entrance. A security supervisor approached. "Mr. Mercer, come with me. I need a receipt for my return badge and access to retrieve my personal equipment. That could be handled later. Then document that I requested it." The supervisor hesitated. "Fine." Instead of taking Daniel upstairs, security escorted him into the main lobby. Employees were gathering for Whitmore Global's quarterly leadership meeting. Daniel immediately understood the choice of location. Grant Holloway stood near the reception desk beside Alexandra, holding a leather portfolio. Two Columbus police officers waited several feet away. Alexandra's expression was colder than the day before. "Daniel," she said. Security completed its review. "That was fast." Grant opened the portfolio. "Your credentials accessed restricted finance servers at 9:14 last night." Daniel looked at him. "My credentials were suspended before 7. It copied. Authentication token can remain active. Not without the physical contractor badge." Grant lifted a clear evidence sleeve containing a flash drive. This was found connected to a finance workstation. It contains retirement account data and bears an identifier associated with your diagnostic laptop. Daniel did not reach for it. "I've never seen that drive." Alexandra stepped closer. "Yesterday, you threatened to release company information. Hours later, security found evidence that you took it. I told you I would preserve evidence if someone continued deleting it. That sounds like an admission. Only if you've already decided what you want it to mean." Grant handed one officer a printed report. "We also have logs showing Mr. Mercer attempted to access executive authorization records." Daniel glanced at the timestamp. 9:14 p.m. He had been home helping Sophie finish her bridge presentation. "Check the building cameras," Daniel said. "Check the parking garage. Check the badge readers." "I wasn't here." Grant smiled faintly. "Remote access exists. Not through the maintenance network, without a hardware credential." Alexandra looked at Grant. "Is that true? There are exceptions." "Which exceptions?" Grant paused, just long enough. Daniel saw uncertainty flicker across Alexandra's face, but pride reached her first. One officer approached Daniel calmly. "Mr. Mercer, the company has filed a complaint involving unauthorized access and removal of proprietary records. We need you to cooperate while we sort this out." "I will." The officer asked him to place his hands behind his back. Around them, conversation stopped. Daniel complied without protest. The handcuffs closed with a quiet click. Alexandra looked at the contractor who had entered her office, questioned her judgment, and warned her about the man she trusted most. Then she laughed. "People like you always think you're smarter than everyone else." Daniel slowly turned toward her. "No, I just learned a long time ago that evidence matters more than ego." Grant's face tightened. The officer began guiding Daniel toward the exit. "One request," Daniel said. "When procedure allows, I want my phone call." Alexandra folded her arms. "Call whoever you want." Daniel looked past her directly at Grant. "I will." Then he noticed Grant's hand slip toward his pocket. His phone screen had illuminated with a security alert. Someone had just tried to open Daniel's encrypted archive. Grant stared at the message, and for the first time, genuine fear replaced his confidence. Daniel understood immediately. The trap was complete, but Grant had made one fatal mistake. By trying to reach the archive, he had just created the independent digital trail Daniel needed. The police cruiser had barely disappeared from the front of Whitmore Global when Sophie Mercer stepped through the revolving doors and saw the empty space where her father had been standing. Mrs. Patterson hurried behind her, one hand holding Sophie's forgotten science project folder. "Daniel was supposed to meet us here," she told the receptionist. "The school called him twice." Sophie noticed the employees first. Nobody seemed willing to look directly at her. Then she saw Alexandra Whitmore standing beside Grant Holloway. "Where's my dad?" Alexandra's expression changed. "Sophie, isn't it? Where is he?" Grant stepped forward. "Your father had to answer some questions." "From the police?" Sophie asked. Nobody answered quickly enough. Her face went pale. "They arrested him?" Alexandra moved closer. "There's an investigation. That doesn't mean everything has been decided." Sophie stared at her. "Did you think he did something wrong?" Alexandra remembered her own laughter and suddenly found no comfortable answer. I believe the evidence I was shown. Sophie's eyes filled, but her voice remained steady. My dad says evidence is supposed to tell you what happened, not what you already want to believe. Grant looked away. Alexandra did not. The sentence landed harder because it came from a 10-year-old carrying a cardboard bridge. 35 minutes later, Daniel sat in a quiet processing room at the downtown police facility. An officer reviewed the complaint while Daniel waited without argument. Finally, a desk phone was placed in front of him. You can make your call now. Daniel nodded. Thank you. He dialed from memory. The number rang once. Bennett. Daniel recognized Rachel's voice immediately. 3 years disappeared in a single breath. Rachel, it's Daniel. Silence. Daniel Mercer? Yes. I thought you promised never to call this number unless something went very wrong. Something went very wrong. Her tone changed instantly. Are you safe? I'm at a police facility. Whitmore Global accused me of stealing financial records. Did you? No. Do you have preservation data? The archive does. Rachel exhaled slowly. She had worked beside Daniel for 7 years in forensic compliance, back when corporations hired them to reconstruct financial trails executives insisted did not exist. What did you find? Employee retirement transfers. Shell administrators. Reused executive authorization. Grant Holloway initiated the movement. Alexandra Whitmore's master approval opened the path. How much? More than 100 million that I personally saw. Possibly more. And the originals? That's why I'm calling. Rachel became silent. Daniel looked through the glass partition at the officer reviewing Whitmore's complaint. Release the originals. Rachel did not ask him to repeat himself. Understood. Audit committee first. Outside counsel second. Federal retirement benefits, investigators third. Include the archive access attempt from this morning. Already logged. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Rachel? Yes. Make sure nothing identifies Sophie's school or home address. Her voice softened. Of course. The call ended. Daniel returned the receiver. At Whitmore Global, Alexandra was still standing in the lobby when the first phone rang. Grant checked his screen. Then the general counsel's phone rang. Then the chief financial officer's. Within 20 seconds, 6 senior executives had received the same preservation notice. Alexandra's assistant hurried toward her. The board audit committee is calling an emergency session. Grant stepped forward. Alexandra, we need to control this. Control what? Whatever Mercer sent. Alexandra's phone illuminated. Board chairman. Before she could answer, Grant's device chimed again. This time Alexandra saw the message over his shoulder. External forensic alert. Unauthorized attempt to access Mercer Preservation Archive traced to Whitmore Executive Network. She slowly raised her eyes to Grant. You told me you didn't know he had an archive. Grant said nothing. Alexandra answered the chairman's call. She listened for 10 seconds, and every trace of confidence left her face. Daniel's single phone call had done more than release evidence. It had reached people Grant could not control, and the first independent record they opened showed that someone inside Alexandra Whitmore's own executive office had tried to destroy the truth after Daniel was already in handcuffs. Alexandra Whitmore listened without interrupting as board chairman Charles Whitmore spoke through her phone. Do not access, delete, transfer, or modify anything connected to employee retirement accounts. Outside counsel has initiated an independent preservation order. Alexandra looked through the glass wall of the executive conference room. Grant Holloway stood 20 feet away, speaking rapidly to someone on his phone. Charles, we have a contractor who stole confidential information. That is not what the evidence currently shows. Grant gave security the access logs, and Mercer's archive contains earlier versions of those same logs. Alexandra became still. Earlier versions? Preserved before someone altered them. Grant noticed her watching and ended his call. Charles continued. The audit committee also received an authentication record showing an attempt to enter Mercer's archive this morning from an executive network assigned to Holloway's office. Alexandra lowered the phone. Grant. He approached carefully. What? Did you attempt to access Daniel Mercer's private archive? Absolutely not. Then give me your phone. Grant stared at her. Excuse me. Your phone. Now. Alexandra, you're reacting emotionally. That sentence was your second mistake today. General Counsel Rebecca Sloan entered the conference room carrying a laptop, followed by Chief Financial Officer Martin Hayes. Rebecca, close the door. We need everyone's company devices preserved immediately. Grant gave a humorless laugh. Because a maintenance contractor sent you some screenshots? Rebecca looked directly at him. Daniel Mercer wasn't always a maintenance contractor. Alexandra turned. What does that mean? Rebecca opened a professional records database. Daniel's photograph appeared beside an employment history Alexandra had never seen. For 11 years, Mercer worked in forensic compliance and financial systems investigations. He specialized in reconstructing concealed transfers, authentication fraud, audit manipulation, and retirement benefit misconduct. Martin looked at the screen. I know that name. Grant's face tightened. From where? The Harrison Mutual investigation 6 years ago. Mercer's team recovered almost $90 million in misdirected employee funds. Alexandra stared at Daniel's photograph. Yesterday, she had asked why a contractor sounded so comfortable discussing compliance architecture. He had answered simply, experience. She had heard humility and mistaken it for insignificance. Rebecca opened the first preserved file. Daniel documented the transactions without entering restricted financial directories. The diagnostic cache exposed routing metadata during an authorized repair. His timeline was sealed before the alleged theft occurred. What time? Alexandra asked. 6:28 last night. Security says he exported records at 9:14. Exactly. His archive predates the event used to accuse him. Martin opened another file. And there's more. 9 transfers appeared across the screen. $24.8 million. $31.6 million. $18.3 million. $27.9 million. Then 5 older transactions. The total climbed past $200 million. Alexandra whispered, how much? Martin finished calculating. $236.4 million. The room went silent. All retirement reserves? Yes. Who initiated them? Martin enlarged the authorization chain. Grant Holloway's credential appeared beside every transfer. Alexandra looked at him. Tell me this is wrong. Grant straightened his jacket. Those were legitimate administrative reallocations. To companies our benefits department doesn't recognize? Special purpose entities. Rebecca interrupted. 3 share registration addresses with consulting companies. Connected to people in your financial network, Grant. He looked toward the door. 2 members of corporate security were already standing outside. Not entering, simply waiting. Alexandra turned back to the screen. But my approval is on every transaction. Martin shook his head. Not every transaction. One approval. He opened a document dated 8 months earlier. Employee benefits administrative restructuring. Alexandra recognized her electronic signature immediately. Beneath it sat a compliance warning marked acknowledged. I don't remember this warning. Rebecca's voice was quiet. The record says your office received it. Alexandra looked at Grant. Memory returned slowly. A rushed Monday morning, investor meetings, dozens of documents. Grant telling her everything had been reviewed. She had signed without reading. Her phone rang again. Charles. Alexandra. The board has voted to suspend your executive authority effective immediately. She closed her eyes. You're removing me? Until the investigation is complete. I built this company. Then you should understand what $236 million in missing employee money means. The call ended. Grant finally spoke. Alexandra, we can still manage this. She looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. No, Grant. You managed me. At the police facility downtown, an officer entered Daniel's room carrying updated documents. Mr. Mercer, the company's complaint is being reassessed. Independent evidence contradicts several allegations against you. Daniel nodded quietly. Thank you. Your former colleague Rachel Bennett is downstairs with outside counsel. Daniel looked up. The officer continued. And the board wants you present when the original records are reviewed. Daniel's handcuffs were removed and placed on the table. Back at Whitmore Global, Alexandra stood beneath the company name in the marble lobby where she had laughed less than 2 hours earlier. The elevator doors opened. Daniel stepped out beside Rachel Bennett, carrying a sealed evidence folder, and Alexandra finally understood that the man she had publicly humiliated was now holding the original record of the decision that could end her control of everything she had built. Daniel crossed the marble lobby without looking at the employees who had watched him leave in handcuffs. Rachel Bennett walked beside him, carrying the sealed evidence folder, while Alexandra Whitmore waited beneath the silver company name that had once seemed permanent. Grant Holloway stood near corporate security, his company phone and laptop already surrendered for preservation. "Mr. Mercer," Alexandra said. Daniel stopped. "Ms. Whitmore." There was no satisfaction in his voice. That unsettled her more than anger would have. "The board is waiting upstairs," she said. "Then we shouldn't keep them waiting." 40 minutes later, Daniel sat across from Alexandra, Grant, outside counsel, and 6 members of the audit committee. Rachel placed the original preservation record on the table. "This archive was sealed at 6:28 p.m. yesterday," she explained. "Every subsequent access attempt was independently time-stamped." Grant leaned forward. "That proves nothing about the transfers themselves." Daniel finally looked at him. "You're right." Grant blinked. Daniel continued. "The transfers prove the transfers." Rachel opened records obtained directly from the retirement custodian after Daniel's call triggered the preservation notice. 9 transactions appeared. The routing identifiers matched Daniel's notes exactly. Martin Hayes spoke quietly. $236.4 million. Grant shook his head. "Administrative reallocations. To entities linked to your financial network," Rachel replied. "That's not the worst part," Daniel said. Alexandra turned toward him. He opened the 8-month-old restructuring authorization. This document created the master approval Grant reused. "Your signature is authentic." Alexandra's face tightened. "I know, but look below it." A compliance warning appeared beneath the authorization. An analyst had flagged the proposed structure because it allowed retirement funds to move without independent approval on each transaction. The warning recommended immediate board review. Alexandra read the acknowledgement field. Her executive account had marked it received. "I never read this." Grant spoke. Quickly. "Alexandra, your office processed hundreds of documents." Daniel's voice remained calm. "Exactly." The room became still. Alexandra looked at him. "What are you saying?" Grant didn't need to forge your signature. He needed you to stop asking questions. Daniel pointed to the approval history. He packaged the restructuring among routine documents on a morning your calendar shows 17 executive items before noon. Your office acknowledged the warning. You signed anyway. After that, his credential could move money beneath your standing authorization. Alexandra stared at Grant. "You told me legal had cleared everything." It had. Rebecca Sloan, the company's general counsel, answered immediately. "No, it hadn't. Legal requested independent review." Grant's composure finally cracked. This company needed speed. Alexandra demanded speed. "And you turned that weakness into access," Daniel said. Grant stood. "You're a contractor pretending to be an investigator." Rachel almost smiled. Daniel stopped being an investigator 3 years ago. His work didn't forget him. Daniel said nothing. He thought of Emily, of missed dinners, of Sophie waiting beside science projects, and of why he had abandoned this world in the first place. Outside counsel closed the folder. Federal investigators have requested Mr. Holloway's cooperation and preservation of his financial records. Corporate security quietly accompanied Grant from the room. There was no spectacle, no applause, just the soft closing of a door. Alexandra remained seated. Her phone vibrated. Charles Whitmore's name appeared. She answered and listened. "Understand," she finally whispered. She placed the phone down. "The board terminated me." Nobody responded. "Effective immediately. My voting authority is suspended, my executive access is revoked, and the company is entering independent oversight." Daniel looked toward the windows. "My call didn't destroy your empire, Alexandra." She gave a hollow laugh. "It certainly feels like it did." The call only turned on the lights. She looked at the document bearing her signature. and what was already broken became visible. Daniel nodded. By late afternoon, trading in Whitmore Global shares had been temporarily halted. Federal retirement benefit investigators had secured the relevant records, and the board announced a plan to restore employee funds using recovered assets, insurance, and executive clawbacks. Alexandra voluntarily surrendered millions in compensation before anyone asked her to. It could not undo what happened, but accountability had to begin somewhere. As Daniel prepared to leave, Alexandra stopped him. Why did you come to me first? Because I didn't know whether you were corrupt or careless. Her eyes lowered. Which was I? Daniel answered quietly. Careless enough to help corruption. Then the conference room door opened, and Sophie stood outside beside Mrs. Patterson, clutching her cardboard bridge. Daniel smiled for the first time that day. Alexandra watched father and daughter embrace, and she understood the final cruelty of her mistake. She had believed power meant controlling the room. Daniel had lost his wife, left a prestigious career, raised his daughter alone, and still possessed something her empire had never been able to purchase: the dignity to tell the truth without needing to humiliate anyone. Tomorrow, Alexandra would have to face the employees whose retirement money had disappeared under her signature. And this time, there would be no executive title between her and the consequences. The next morning, Alexandra Whitmore walked into the lobby without an assistant, an executive badge, or the authority to make anyone move aside. Employees gathered beneath the glass atrium where Daniel had stood in handcuffs less than 24 hours earlier. Alexandra stopped beneath the silver letters bearing her family name. Yesterday, she began, I believed authority made me certain. I was wrong. No one spoke. Employee retirement funds were placed at risk because Grant Holloway abused our systems. But he was able to do that because I approved a structure I did not properly examine, ignored a warning I should have read, and dismissed the man who tried to tell me the truth. Her eyes found Daniel near the back of the lobby. Sophie stood beside him holding his hand. Alexandra took a breath. Daniel Mercer deserved respect. Instead, I judged him by his badge, his job, and the accusation placed in front of me. Then I laughed while police put him in handcuffs. The silence became absolute. Alexandra stepped away from the microphone and crossed the marble floor toward him. Daniel, I cannot undo yesterday. No, and I cannot ask you to pretend it didn't happen. No, she looked at Sophie. But I can apologize. Sophie studied her carefully. Alexandra lowered herself slightly so they could meet at eye level. I treated your father unfairly. I'm sorry you had to see that. Sophie glanced at Daniel, then back at Alexandra. Dad says saying sorry matters more when you change what happens next. Alexandra's eyes softened. Your dad is right. Daniel squeezed Sophie's hand. There was no victory in his expression because humiliation had never been what he wanted for Alexandra. Justice was not trading places with the person who had hurt you. It was making certain the truth had somewhere safe to stand. Over the following months, federal investigators traced the diverted retirement money through Grant's network of shell companies. Most of the funds were recovered or restored through seized assets, insurance coverage, and corporate repayment programs. Grant faced federal financial charges, and the consequences were left to the courts. Whitmore Global survived, but the empire Alexandra had controlled did not. The board reorganized the company, replaced senior leadership, established independent compliance oversight, and prohibited any executive from approving retirement fund restructuring without multiple reviews. Alexandra surrendered substantial compensation and stock benefits to the Employee Recovery Program. She never returned as CEO. Daniel was offered a senior position overseeing corporate compliance. The salary was more than he had earned in years. He declined. Instead, he accepted consulting work with an employee retirement protection nonprofit, with one condition. He would be home most nights by 6. On a cool October evening, Daniel sat at the kitchen table while Sophie rebuilt her science project bridge. It still leans, she complained. Daniel inspected it. Maybe it needs another support. Sophie smiled. That sounds like a dad lesson. Occupational hazard. A white envelope rested beside his coffee. Alexandra had mailed it that afternoon. Inside was a handwritten note thanking him for giving her one chance to listen before exposing the truth, even though she had wasted it. Daniel folded the letter and placed it back inside. "Are you going to forgive her?" Sophie asked. Daniel considered the question. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending someone made the right choice. Then what does it mean? He looked toward the photograph of Emily beside the refrigerator. Sometimes it means giving people room to make a better one. Sophie nodded and returned to her bridge. Daniel watched her carefully reinforce the weak side until the little structure finally stood straight. Months earlier, Alexandra had possessed buildings, money, influence, and a name visible across the Columbus skyline. Daniel had possessed an old Ford, a contractor badge, a small apartment, and a promise to his daughter. Yet when the truth finally arrived, only one of them had been prepared to stand without power. Daniel never celebrated the fall of Alexandra's empire. He simply went home, held his daughter's hand, and continued living the lesson he had tried to teach all along. Dignity does not need to shout, truth does not need permission, and sometimes one quiet voice is enough to make an entire room listen.